All right. So the last lecture gave you guys some background on Seneca's Troades. We had an audiamo section where we listened to me speaking for a few minutes about the background to this play and to Seneca and to the Emperor Nero. And now we're going to look at how we break down a long and complicated sentence like this and come up with a translation using this grammatical knowledge which we possess in this sort of atomistic fashion, knowing a lot of words, a lot of endings for cases and numbers, a lot of persons, numbers, tense, moods, and voices for verbs. How do we take that knowledge and pony it over into a translation for a Latin sentence? So one of the first things you're going to want to do when you come across a Latin sentence is a step that's not written here at the top of the page, but you're going to want to actually read through the entire passage, preferably metrically, since this is poetry. Seneca is writing for us in iambic trimeters. And once we've done that, once we've began to get a sense for what we can understand just based on reading it, allowing our eyes to drift across the page, and hearing what we've said as we've read it aloud, then we can begin to break things down a little bit more. And the first thing that you want to do in any Latin translation is find your verb. Remember, your verb gives you such crucial information. Your verb tells you who is doing each of the actions of the sentence. So remember, verbs have person and number, which tells you whether the subject is an I, a you, a he, she, it, a we, a you all, a they. Verbs also show tense. Verbs also show mood. Verbs also show voice. So you get a tremendous amount of information if you can find those verbs. And the most crucial is it helps you narrow down your subject. If you have, as you notice as your eyes drift down this page, every one of these verbs is third person singular. You have that very distinctive T, right? Fidit, trusts. Dominator, a passive ending for a deponent verb. Lords it over. Metuit, present tense of metuo metura, fears. Dadit, the perfect tense of dodare dedidatum, has given. Videat, a present subjunctive third person singular of to see, let him look at. We've learned a great deal of information just by identifying those verbs, and you'll notice that the notation that I've used here to identify our verbs is capitalization. We've written fidit, metuit, dominator, dadit, videat in a larger font than the others. And once we've done that, we can begin to use that information to ask, well, who is it who trusts and lords it? And who is it who fears and has given and should see? And we do that by looking for nouns that are in the nominative case. So here we find a couple of potential subjects. We have quicumque, which is the nominative, whoever. We have potanes, which is an adjective, but it's nominative, so it could be a substantive adjective. So it might be the subject of the verb on the next line, dominator. And so we can begin to provisionally think about at least our first few verbs and begin to get a sense for what's going on here. Whoever trusts and being powerful lords it over something. And now we need to move on a little bit to figure out what it is that he lords it over and find some more information. So as we begin to break down this sentence, which clearly has multiple verbs, we've realized that we're going to have multiple clauses. So what we need to do is identify conjunctions that link together clauses. And you'll notice on this handout, I've given them to you in a bright red font to remind you that these guys are like little stop signs. Each time you see a conjunction, and if you've ascertained that that conjunction actually is linking together two clauses and not just two nouns, that conjunction is really helpful to you because it says stop here and translate everything up to me as if it were a single sentence. And then take the chunk that comes next as another smaller sentence, the chunk that comes next as another smaller sentence, and you've taken what looks initially to be a very daunting sentence, and you've turned it into something that's much more small and manageable, and you just keep repeating. You've turned one long sentence into maybe 5 shorter sentences. So we have et, the word for and remember conjunctions are linking words, so but, and, because, all those sorts of words can link together clauses. So here we have an et, a nec, and a que linking together clauses. So remember, red is for stop. Chunk your sentences by the units these prepositions define. And you might be wondering, what do I mean by chunk? Well, what we've done is we've taken all of our clauses and we've separated them onto separate lines of the screen. So we have quicumque regno fidit. We have our first clause. Then we have a new verb with a new subject, again, like a miniature sentence in the next line. Et potanes dominator. So whoever trusts, and whoever being powerful lords it. Nec, and not, remember, or nor. And does not fear something. We don't know what yet because we haven't done our accusatives. And then we have a que, So and has given over something, maybe a spirit. We see something that looks sort of accusative and spirit-like at the beginning. And then we have our subjunctive verb, videat, let him look at. And now we can move on. We found our subjects, we found our verbs, and we can begin to think about adding direct objects. So we have whoever trusts, and our next clause, being powerful exercises dominion. No direct objects yet. But notice our light baby blue that we've used in the next line. This is the color that I've chosen for accusatives. And remember, direct objects in Latin take the accusative case. So we have a special ending that tells us that these are our direct objects. So, and does not fear the fickle gods, and has given over his credulous spirit, or his trusting spirit. We don't know which connotation credulous has here yet. Let him look at me, at, and you. And now that we've found those core elements of our sentence, we've figured out who it is who's doing each of these verbs, and we figured out now what it is that we're doing those verbs to, the accusative direct object. Now we can go back and add all the other stuff. So I've used this sort of reddish magenta color for regno and rebus lites for the dative case. And remember, the dative likes to show up with verbs of giving, showing, and telling, and it usually means 2 or 4. So we have a couple of datives that, at least prospectively, we're going to translate with 2 or 4. And I've used this nice bright purple for the ablatives. And remember, ablatives are like actors. They need a motivation. So you guys should have already, from your intro Latin classes, a long list of ablative case uses. And here we're probably going to have an ablative of place where. We sort of have to try them out if we have a bare, naked, quivering ablative like we have here with no preposition to guide us in how to translate it. So we just have to sort of contemplate our options. Is it place where? Is it ablative of means or instrument? Is it ablative of time when? Is it ablative of separation? And we have to find out which one works. So we can now go back and add those to the sentence, keeping in mind these basic ideas about how you translate the cases. So for our first chunk, we have whoever trusts, and now we have this dative with the verb of trusting. Whoever trusts in his rule. And, first big stop sign, first conjunction, being powerful, our subject, exercises dominion in a great court. Sounds pretty good. We've chosen ablative of place where for our magna aula. I notice this is a great example of a hyperbaton. This is poetry, so we have an adjective in the ablative, we have a noun in the ablative case. They go together even though they've stepped over intervening words. The name for this is hyperbaton, and we're going to see it a lot in poetry especially, but also in prose. Then we have another big stop sign, neck, and we have our verb and its 2 direct objects, and does not fear the fickle gods, and has given over his trusting spirit to his happy circumstances. Rebus lites, dative with verbs of giving, showing, or telling. It's a true indirect object. Let him look at me and you. And then we have another noun, Troia, which is in the vocative case, O Troy. We're addressing Troy as if it's a person. And after going through all of that, we've come up with a really good provisional translation for our sentence. And if we were doing this for publication, we might want to go back through this and make it a little bit more elegant. We might want to think about how we can mirror some of these word order tricks, like, for example, the hyperbaton that we mentioned in the second line, as it's written here. But in the meantime, we know what's going on in the sentence. This is Hecuba, the Queen of Troy, speaking. And she's giving us a warning about the brevity and the ephemerality of human affairs, and especially of regnum, of kingship. Whoever trusts in his rule and being powerful exercises dominion in a great court and does not fear the fickle gods, and has given over his credulous spirit to his happy circumstances. Let him look at me and you, Troy. And this not only gives us the circumstances, but it helps us to situate ourselves within the narrative of the Trojan War, because this strongly implies, together with the title of the play, which presumably would have been known to the audience as they went to sit in the theater, that it sounds as if Troy has already fallen here. We know that a 10-year war is fought to sack this city, and it sounds here as if Hecuba is standing outside the fallen walls of her city, as we are in fact going to find out in the next sentences, as she reminisces over all of the allies who came to help her from all over the world, and how none of their strength availed at all in saving the city of Troy from its enemies.